Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start a new document that you're going to do yourselves and make a list of all of the tips and the things that we can see that all of the readings have, or most of the readings have, that can help us to identify important information and identify answers in the readings. So the first one that I want to talk about is but and however. These two words very, very often show you that the writer is now introducing important information. Let's look at one of the readings that we have done. So this one is what's the purpose of gaining knowledge? It was a passage 3 in the first test, I think. And I've made the buts purple, and then the green is where an answer came. So, for example, this sentence over here, what would the founders of these have thought of a course called Arson for Profit? I kid you not, we have it on the books. That pointed you toward this heading over here, number 6, a surprising course title. He mentioned the title, and he said, I kid you not, I'm not joking, to show that it's surprising. Introduced by the word but. In this one over here, wouldn't this be the perfect course for prospective arsonists to sign up for? Prospective arsonists is people who want to burn down buildings. That was number 8. The possibility of attracting the wrong kind of student, that's the prospective arsonists, and then the question and the would gives you a possibility. Again, introduced by the word but. This one was a bit more difficult. He took his cue from, he mentions the title of the course, and then a bit later, a couple of sentences later, he gives these two meanings of the title of the course. But again, introduced by that word but. And that was number 2, a course title with 2 meanings. In paragraph E, he introduces, but to what end, with what result? That's what this means, what result? There seem to be 2 main attitudes toward that question. And that was a slightly more difficult one, the importance of 2 key issues. There was nothing there about equal importance, but 2 key issues was in the heading, 2 main attitudes was in the text, introduced by the word but. Finally, we would not call that firefighting, we have a separate word for it, arson, introduced by the word but. And that was different names, we don't call it firefighting, we call it arson for different outcomes. The headings here were very difficult. It is a passage 3. All I'm trying to say for this video is, can you see how many times the word but introduced the answer, or the sentence that you should be looking at? Let's look at another one. So this was Lost City, about Machu Picchu. It's not as common in this one. The previous one, that writer used it a lot, but it's here a few times. Introduced by the word but, they never passed through this area around Machu Picchu. And that was one of these true, false, not givens, where we had to go to that sentence. It wasn't the most common. They never passed through it, so we chose that as false. So that was introduced by the word but. Another one, we should remember that he wrote this book in 1948, and his journal entries of the time said something different. That gave us this heading over here, different accounts of the same journey. The one in 1948 and one when he actually went on the journey. Then there was one more in this reading, a difficult one. If you remember, I didn't really agree that it was the topic of this paragraph. There's the however there. He returned. That word returning was important because it was an important keyword in the true, false, not given. So it's right next to the however. Then he published his story in the following sentence. And that gave us heading number 7, he publishes his theory. So again, 3 of these answers were introduced by a but or a however. Let's look at another one. This was the benefits of being bilingual. We just finished it, the passage 3 of the second test that we did. If you remember, This question over here, it was a yes, no, not given. Have the attitudes changed? The answer was in this paragraph, and it was sort of linked by this however. The however is very important there. They were at a disadvantage, or considered to be at a disadvantage over the past few decades. However, they have benefits. So that whole structure there, centered on the however, gave you the answer. This one, the however, is at the end of the sentence. Remember, it doesn't matter. It can be at the beginning of the sentence or at the end of the sentence. And that was a very important keyword just before the however, because you wanted to match that word difficulties with this phrase negative consequences. So if you were scanning for negative consequences, you would see a however, and then you would look around the however to see is there anything there that's important. Similar thing, the however came after the important information. You will see that the same writer often has the same style. This was very important, this word here, or phrase here, background noise. That background noise was a certain type of non-verbal auditory input. Very difficult vocabulary, but I just want to show you that the however showed you that it was there, that important information was there. In the others, we'll look at them quickly. There weren't so many. There was just one in this one about agriculture. There's the however. There's the important information. That was this question here. The two problems that were mentioned, which affect these farmers in developing countries. So after the however, there are all the problems that they mention. But there was another one, the same piece of information. This question over here also was targeted at that sentence. Farmers in certain parts of the world, smallholder farmers in developing countries. So that, however, actually introduced two answers. In collecting, there wasn't much. As I said, different writers have different styles, so this writer didn't really use it. Only one, that but over there, introduced this sentence over here, and that was one of the answers. And then in Cork, there was also only one, just mentioning these advantages and introducing this list. So not too many in the last two, but I hope you can see that's enough evidence for you to see how important these words but and however are. So we're going to add that to our list. There are two others that I want to add. One is although, has a similar functions as these two, and then also yet can also come in there. This is not important, but we call these contrast markers. They mark where the writer is contrasting two different ideas. Alright, so that's the first thing that we can get from those 6 readings. The second thing I want to talk about, we didn't see too much of it, but in future readings we will see it's very important, and that's where the writer introduces a list using specific language, things like two reasons, or 3 factors, or 4 benefits, advantages. When you see this kind of language, you must underline those and find those 3 factors, find those 4 advantages. The writer uses this language to introduce a list, and IELTS loves those. Alright, let's look at a couple of examples, just 2 that I found. In the purpose of gaining knowledge reading, or reading 3, the writer did it over here. He spoke about 2 main attitudes, and then you should go and find the 2 attitudes. Here they just asked one question about this. It was one of the headings. 2 main attitudes was here, the equal importance of 2 key issues. The other one was in the agriculture reading that we did. He introduced the whole passage with 2 things, and then there's the first and there's the second. And there they spoke about the 2 unique aspects. And the answer was for this one over here, characteristics that only apply to food production. So again, those were just 2 examples of that, but when you see this sort of thing, underline it and find all of the things that they mention. IELTS likes to ask questions from that. The next thing I want to point out, it's not too common, but can really help you because it's easy to see, is when the writer asks questions. He asks the questions for a reason, because he's showing you that this is important information. Usually it's the answer to the question, which is important, but it can be, depending on the question type, it can be the question itself. For example, in the gaining knowledge reading, this question over here that he asked was very important for one of the headings. It was for heading number 6. And this question over here, which he asked, was also very important. It was for question number 8. Again, there was one in paragraph E, which introduced important information. Now, be careful, of course. There are sometimes he'll ask a question and IELTS does not ask a question from there, but that doesn't mean that this is not important. You should still look at the answer to the question. There was another important question in the collecting as a hobby reading. Again, IELTS didn't ask a question about this, but you should have recognized that question and seen that all of this is the answer to all of those questions. So the answers to this question were very, very important. Why they do it? They want to make money, give them a sense of triumph, develop their social life, bring them into contact with like-minded people. Another motive is find something special. All of these pieces of information were very important, and IELTS did choose some answers from there. So this helped you to understand the general topic of the whole passage. Right, so that's questions. Look out for those. And then the last thing I want to point out is something called inverted commas. These are these or these, but usually these are for speaking. It's actually these that I'm talking about, the single inverted commas. So I'm going to delete the other ones, and I'm just going to say especially to introduce new terms, which I will explain now. Let's look at an example. There are two examples in the 6 readings that we did. The first one was in this gaining knowledge passage, reading 3. And if you remember, that was one of our answers. So that was in inverted commas because it's new to the reader, it's new to a native speaker even. It's the name of a course. So they put it in inverted commas. And if you remember, it was the answer to number 33. So the inverted commas showed us that the writer wanted us to pay attention to those words. The other example came from the being bilingual reading, and this was a particularly important one that I want to talk about. Yes, there were inverted commas there, and that was the answer to number 28 over here. But something that I want to pay particular attention to is this word over here. When you see that the writer introduces a new term, sometimes he may put it in inverted commas, sometimes he may not. But when he said this is called, or this is termed, or this is known as, or any similar language, and he introduces this new language that the normal person doesn't know, you must pay particular attention to that, because IELTS loves to target those for their questions. We will come back to this. Hopefully we will see more of it in the next few readings that we do. Alright, so I think that's enough review for now. Let's move on to the next 6 readings.